Hello guys, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today I want to discuss the possibility of The Legend of Zelda still getting a release in 2022. So the basis for this conversation today comes down to the idea that a lot of us have discussed over the past few years of The Legend of Zelda being essentially treated like an annual franchise by Nintendo. This is something that, to my knowledge, Nintendo has never outright confirmed to be part of their plan, although there has been some conversations that they may have put out there in the past. This is really something that it feels like, for the most part, the fans noticed. That if you track The Legend of Zelda and all of the different releases going back 7 or 8 years, we kind of realize that every single year there has been some form of Legend of Zelda release. Including the Hyrule Warriors releases, you can actually trace an annual Zelda release going all the way back to 2013 with the Wind Waker HD on the Wii U. That is pretty incredible, and granted, we're including some of the weirder, more unique games or the spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors, as I mentioned, or Triforce Heroes, the HD ports of the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, of course Majora's Mask 3D, getting an updated re-release on the Nintendo 3DS. So we obviously are including things that aren't new mainline entries, but it's still very impressive and pretty crazy when you think about almost 10 years now. I said I think 7 or 8 years. It's actually going back 9 years, almost a full decade, that there's been some form of Zelda release or re-release going back to 2013, which is really cool because it means we've got a ton of Zelda content that we've been enjoying for close to a decade. Which brings us to the reason for today's conversation, which is that going into 2022 at the beginning of the year, we were told that Breath of the Wild 2 would be the 2022 release for the Zelda series. However, as we know, earlier this year, Nintendo did confirm that that game got pushed back into next year, currently slated for spring of 2023, which leaves a big gap this year in 2022 for Zelda. And now that we're in the back half of the year, we've only got just 4 or 5 months to go before the year is over. Will we see Nintendo squeeze in a Zelda release before the end of the year? And it's starting to look like maybe that won't happen. So let's get down to brass tacks. We know what we're actually talking about here, and it's whether or not Nintendo is going to surprise us in the last 4 or 5 months of the year with a confirmation that a port of the Wind Waker HD or Twilight Princess HD or both actually gets announced and released before the end of 2022. Those are the main focused games that everyone is really paying attention to. Wind Waker, Twilight Princess. Are there chances of other games getting some sort of HD re-release on the Switch like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask? Yes, that certainly could happen, but I think that most of us believe it comes down to either the Wind Waker or Twilight Princess. And that's been a conversation that people have been talking about for several years, even going back to when Link's Awakening was getting its re-release and remake back in 2019 on the Nintendo Switch. Would we see Wind Waker and Twilight Princess also come? Obviously, Skyward Sword was in the conversation for years and years, and there were rumors, and there were hints, and there were theories, and there were teases. Many people talking about how that game felt impossible to port and bring off of the Wii onto the Switch or any other console. I never believed that, and there's probably several videos I've made going back the past few years where I mentioned that I always thought Skyward Sword had a chance to come off of the Wii and make it to the Switch, and sure enough, that happened last year, and it was really great and very successful, and it was awesome. So with Skyward Sword finding a way to come off of the Wii to the Switch, everyone keeps thinking that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess has the same opportunity. And you know what? I do too. I do think that there's a chance those games will come to the Switch. Maybe as a double pack, maybe as singular releases. Definitely. Now, will they come out this year? That's tough to say. And I can only come back to the fact that the year is, getting close to over. It's close enough to being over that it's... What we have to start analyzing, you guys, is the amount of time Nintendo would have to announce the games and then have them also release. That's where things get a little bit dicey. But luckily, there is precedence for this to happen and make sense. And to me, that comes down to Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which was announced near the end of 2020 and then itself also came out near the end of 2020. I believe that game was announced in September and then released in October. And nope, actually, I'm completely wrong. I just looked it up, and that game was actually announced in early September and then released only a few weeks later, also in September. So that game was announced and released within the same month, and obviously was a huge hit and sold millions of copies, and in my opinion was very great. I know that there were some people not happy with the pricing structure and everything that they did there, or they felt like there was a lack of content or upgrades, and I mean, that's a different conversation. I discussed that plenty back when the game was announced and released. I personally found it to be an excellent collection and a wonderful release, totally worth the $60 for all 3 games remade in HD. Absolutely loved it. And so, man, that definitely changes the conversation when we really think about it, actually. Because I kind of came into this video thinking that while it was possible for Nintendo to announce and release one or both of these Zelda games this year, I also was feeling like we were running out of time for them to announce it and then have enough time to hype and release them. But after double checking the dates for Mario 3D All-Stars, I actually, mid-video, am kind of changing my opinion here, so you're catching an organic adjustment of my thoughts as I kind of record this video and have this conversation with you guys. And with only 2 weeks between announce and reveal for 3D All-Stars, maybe Nintendo could announce and then release a Zelda game or a Zelda collection of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, and actually have that happen before the end of the year. And so then, of course, the question becomes, what would they even do? If Wind Waker and or Twilight Princess are the target games that we expect them to release this year or to release next, which I personally do feel like those are the games that make the most sense. That's what everyone has been talking about for years. Yes, they could throw us a curveball with an Ocarina of Time or a Majora's Mask, or even another remake game, something akin to what they did with Link's Awakening. I really don't expect one of those. I just think Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, those are the games that make the most sense. And so, how would they do it? I've touched on this before. I think the double pack makes a lot of sense. And yes, it also gets tricky because of Skyward Sword getting a solo release for the full $60 price. So would Nintendo want to do the typical Nintendo thing where they release each Wind Waker and Twilight Princess individually and charge full price for both of those? Or do they pull the more consumer-friendly route and do what they did with Mario 3D All-Stars and just release a double pack of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess in HD and just release that double pack for the full $60 price? I want to believe they would do that because when it comes to Skyward Sword, they had to do 2 major things. They had to make that game HD for the first time ever, and they had to do a lot of work and adjustments on the control schemes and offer us a couple of options. When it comes to the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, it's not the same scenario. They don't have to adjust any of the controls really, at least not to a significant degree, and they don't have to make those games HD and update the graphics because that already was done when those games released on the Wii U. And it was at that time that they updated the graphics to HD and the textures. They kind of updated the textures, and they definitely upgraded the lighting. At least when it comes to Twilight Princess, I really feel like the lighting engine was very much enhanced. And so they don't even have to do anything to the graphics, really. At least anything major to the graphics to port Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. All they need to do is take the HD graphics that already exist, do some small tweaks on the controls, obviously just to make them work for the, the Switch controls, and then release it as a double pack for $60. With Mario 3D All-Stars being $60, you basically had 3 games at $20 a piece. If they do it with the double pack for Zelda, you've got 2 games for $30 a piece. I think most people are going to be willing to pay that. In fact, Skyward Sword is a great template for this because everyone complained about that game being sold for $60, but that game sold like, I don't know, 3, 5, 7 million. I'll have to look up the numbers here, but that game was a huge hit despite the price complaints. I know that the same level of success would be seen if they did a double pack for Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And so we come back to the last major question here, which I've kind of already touched on here, is are they even going to do this in the first place? Will they release these games or some other Zelda surprise game before 2022 is over and stick to the annual Zelda release? Or did they really not anticipate having to delay Breath of the Wild and are they just going to have to realize that this is going to be an off year? Maybe their hand was forced with Breath of the Wild 2. They expected it to be the 2022 game. They realized it wasn't going to be done in time. They delayed it to next year and suddenly have found themselves with a gap in Zelda releases for 2022. Maybe that is the case. I don't know, am I 50-50 on this? Maybe I'm 50-50. 50% says yes, they're going to release some kind of Zelda game still in the back half of the year. The other 50% says that they were caught off guard, they didn't expect to delay Breath of the Wild 2, and they're just going to allow 2022 to be a gap year. It's really tough to say what's going to happen, but I really hope that they find a way to release some kind of Zelda game this year. And keep in mind, I don't even need it. I own both of those games, both on the GameCube and the Wii, as well as the Wii U HD re-releases, and I have enough other games to play on all 3 platforms this year that I don't need these games to release and to exist. But would I like to see it happen? You bet. I would love to be able to play these games on my Wii U. I mean, I played... on my Switch. I replayed Wind Waker HD on the Wii U earlier this year, which was great. I decided not to move on to Twilight Princess, to just wait and see if that game was going to get the re-release on Switch this year, and I would then play it again if that's what they actually do. But at this time, we just don't know. We just kind of have to wait and see. So I'll leave the question with you guys. Do you think we're going to get an annual Zelda release this year of some kind of surprise before the end of 2022? Or is 2022 going to be the first gap in nearly a decade and we have to wait for Breath of the Wild 2 next year to get our Zelda fix? Tell me what you guys think, and with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.